All right, who doesn't love to laugh? But as a copywriter, when somebody tasks you with writing something funny, it is probably the scariest assignment you could ever get. Writing for a brand that wants to be funny is a very specific skill set because humor is one of the absolute hardest things to pull off in marketing. What's funny to one person isn't funny to another. Funny is really relative. So it may seem like people who can write really lighthearted, whimsical copy are a dime a dozen. But the truth is, writers who can write for funny brands are incredibly rare. If you want to be one of them, then I recommend you listen to this video. At Hire a Writer, which is my copywriting agency, we have gone through and broken down the top 500 brands in the world based on brand voice using linguistic references. So we've taken and said, okay, here are the words that brands like this use. Here are the phraseologies that they use, and distilled them down into archetypes. Because as a writer, it's a lot easier to pretend like you're writing as a human to a human than pretend like you're writing for a brand to an audience. So just as a creative exercise, we did this. And when we formalized and we realized like these could be really valuable to a lot of writers. So I want to dive in today, and you can look at all the videos. So we have the videos that kind of the whole series that goes through what each of those brand types are and how you can get better at writing for them. What I want to go through today is writing for funny brands. If you're a little bit scared, you should be, because this is not an easy thing to do. But if you can master it, you become one of the most valuable copywriters in the world. I actually have a guy on my team who's really, really good at funny copy. I cannot say honestly that I am, but most of what I have created when we put this brand together is referencing a lot of the things that he's very good at. The brand archetype that we use, so we use caricatures, okay? Caricatures are helpful because they help you, again, visualize, like, who is this person who's funny to so many people? And the person that we have created, the character to represent these brands, is called Ben, okay? Ben is everybody's best friend. And the brands that write like this, that you would mimic or that you would study in order to understand some of this are here. Cheerios, Red Bull, Corona, Lowe's, Ford, TikTok. You can look at brands like these and look at the language they use, the phrasing they use, the pacing, the line breaks, the punctuation, all the mechanisms in copywriting that give you the ability to implement tone or elements of voice and tone are done well by brands like this, okay? I mean, how whimsical is that? You have a Cheerio as the dot on the I, right? So even down to typography and ways that copy translates visually, you'll find really relevant and highly illustrated in this brand, which is a really good segue into this, which are kind of our bank of keywords. If we were to assign some keywords to Ben as a character type, right, as a brand type, we would use words like illustrative, 90s child. So now you can flex this generation. The idea is tons of references and many pop culture references. Funny, relatable, okay? So comedy needs to be very relatable in order to be believable. There's a wackiness and a zaniness to this, but as a copywriter, you can't do wacky and zany because then you become like Salvador Dali. Like nobody knows what you're talking about. You can't convey really abstract ideas in text. It's really, really hard to do. So which is why I've already mentioned things like punctuation. Some of these like tools that we as copywriters have in our toolkit to amp up copy or to make it seem different or unique. While this kind of copy comes off as very digestible, very light, very easy to take in, it issues an immediate impression and impact, it's actually probably something you'll work on more than any other kind of copy because every little word counts, every little syllable counts. The way that syllables, truly, like when you're writing funny copy, the pacing of it is really important, which is syllables, right? So one of the exercises that I give writers who want to become really good at this is like go write poetry. Because if you can learn to constrain yourself to certain pacing of syllable use and things like that, it'll teach you the rhythm of text. Not necessarily spoken, right, but read, which is a different discipline all in itself. So there are lots of ways to get good at this, and it's not easy to do. One of the ways that we kind of help writers understand some of these brand voices is using literary references. And the reference we would use to correspond to Ben is Mark Twain. Okay, Mark Twain was very cool and he was very funny. And he said, "It usually takes me more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech." which is illustrative of what I said before, which is this kind of writing takes an immense amount of creative discipline, an immense amount of effort. Not an easy thing to do to learn how to write like this well, but it is doable, obviously. I don't mean to discourage you from it. If you're watching this video, you probably care to be good at it, which is great. So think about lifestyle. Think about marrying different elements of lifestyle. There's a huge social component to brands like this. And it may be that the social component is like, it's hilarious to be an introvert and nobody gets me. Or it may be very family, community, get in, be active. So I'm not trying to imply that all these brands are lifestyle brands, although many are. But just that the way that this brand seeks to convey is that they're busy living life and enjoying it. Zest is a good word to bring in when you're thinking about writing for brands like this. Let's think of cultural references. So cultural references that I would pull in to kind of convey Ben are Jack Black, Freddie Prinze Jr., John C. Reilly, Stephen Colbert. So many of these have, so think of Jack Black, you think physical comedy, right? So there's that physical component I was talking about, like action, movement, things like that, right? So which was why pacing is so important. But then there's also people like Freddie Prinze Jr. who are like a beloved icon from when we were in high school, when we were in college, right? So there's referential and kind of generational things there. Somebody like John C. Reilly, who can kind of run the gamut of like really serious and really hilariously funny. So you know he's very serious about his craft. And then Stephen Colbert, which is total satire, which is very, very, very important. Many times, what you will be able to pull off before you can pull off funny is satire or sarcasm. So satire and sarcasm are like low-hanging fruit because they're very well defined. You know exactly what sarcasm is and how to do it. You know exactly what satire is and how to do it. So oftentimes, before you can be jokey or funny, you need to get satire and sarcasm down in your writer toolbox and become really fluent in those mechanisms. So just use him as an example for that because he's a good satirist, obviously. So again, we're thinking a lot of sounds, a lot of movement, a lot of color, a lot of community. You know, those don't sound like funny things, but funny things don't happen in isolation. Funny things happen in the world as we're walking around living our lives. So situational and scenario-based are going to be a huge part of the messaging that you employ for a brand like this, which is why we're using so many kind of social and socially oriented images to help you understand kind of what the mood you want to convey with a brand like this would be. Speaking of mood, one of the most important things as a copywriter is to consider, how does this copy make somebody feel? And when you write like Ben, you want somebody to feel like they're having a week of vacation as a kid. There's a huge nostalgic component to writing well for brands like this. Think back to when, okay? So using that as a way to get people in and lead them on a journey where we're all enjoying this moment together socially in life is a really powerful way to then have enough buy-in from the reader to do something funny that they react to, okay? So you can't just go funny. You can't just dismiss all of the other marketing copywriting disciplines, which include hooks and lead-ins and, you know, big ideas and sequence and all those things, right? You still have to do all the best practices. You just have to then layer on top of it this kind of humorous element so that people, you know, walk with you on the journey. Okay, so let's look at exactly how some of these brands that we've categorized as Ben would talk. So these are some of their taglines. Cheerios, it's a honey of an O. It's clever, it's sweet, it's tongue-in-cheek. Corona, miles away from ordinary. So we want to be different, we want to be unique, we want to be out of the box. Lowe's, do it right for less. So listen to the cadence. So many consonants, okay? Vowels take a lot of work, consonants are really easy, and consonants have timpani, right? They have emphasis. Consonants can help you create that rhythm, okay, if you really dive into the language. Red Bull gives you wings. Red Bull is banana pants, right? Everybody gave them permission to be banana pants, right? But they only did that because they got loyalty, they built community, they have a fun product, right? They've done all the right things, and then they got permission to be as wacky and zany as they want to be. TikTok, real people, real videos. Part of, like, think back to like America's Funniest Home Videos, right? people love this like physical comedy, which we've already referenced a bunch of times here. They love the action, they love the movement, they love the spontaneity. So good comedy feels spontaneous, which is totally counterintuitive to what it takes to produce it as a creative professional. I know that. But it has to feel effortless. There has to be a sense that like we're just here hanging out, having a beer, doing our thing, and riffing. Because that's when it's really funny, right? You can't not have the element of surprise or spontaneity and have it still be humorous. Otherwise, people just feel like they've been set up for a joke, which is not funny because then they're conscious of it. So it's just like taking people along that ride and making it seem sweet and effortless and fun and inclusive. And then forward, built, forward, tough. So, it's people might disagree with me on this, but I do think that many of the brands who do humor really well play on stereotypes and motifs. So like some of the hyper-masculinity that you see in some of these brands, playing into the millennial culture, playing into Gen Z culture. Anytime you can tap into a component of a subculture that's part of the audience segment that you're going for, you'll be able to use something that feels a lot like an inside joke, which is like memes. Like that's all memes are, right? Is something that feels like an inside joke. It's like, oh, I get it. Nobody else gets that, right? I get it. And that's what you want people to feel. That's when people have exactly what I just did, like the involuntary smile, the involuntary affection, the sweep of nostalgia, all the things that humor is capable of unlocking and tapping into in the human experience. This is not an easy thing to do. You can get good at it. Practice. So I recommend look back, Google through, go to some of these websites of some of these companies, go to their about page, dig, okay? Get past the consumer stuff into the internal facing stuff, which tells you a little bit more about their culture, which tells you a little bit more about what they're going for, right? Not just what you consume as a consumer, but what kind of is behind the scenes making that experience possible, because that's going to give you a lot of clues in the language they use and the messaging that they've chosen, because they work really hard on that messaging too, right? It just doesn't get as much screen time as all the other stuff. Watch a lot of ads. So don't just skip the YouTube ads. Like actually watch them through, unless they're so weirdly targeted that you're like, this isn't a thing. Or just Google commercials, right? Pay attention to commercials. Spend a lot of time with taglines and ads, because that's where you'll see a lot of this kind of language emerge, because it has to be a hook, right? It has to be quick. And then lastly, I would just say, like I had said before, like if you, from a writing skill perspective, poetry, haiku, creative constraints, short form. Think about the rhythm of the language and how you're kind of delivering ideas and things like that. And then lastly, just like really think about what's funny. Think about what's funny to you. If you don't think it's funny, then don't write it. Think about how you're going to share an experience with a reader, something that you authentically, legitimately think is funny, and then begin to craft it and crowd test it. Because again, humor is so relative. It's really important to think about expanding your understanding of what is funny and understanding what other people think is funny. This may be a form of writing that you're like, tune in, zone in, click in. I got it. Like this is who I am and I'm so good at it. And I know people like that. If you are, you can be incredibly successful using this kind of writing. You may also feel like me that like this is so hard. It's really, really hard to be funny naturally and not feel self-conscious or not be self-conscious and come across cringe. In which case, there are plenty of other brand voice styles available to you. I would absolutely recommend you try this, because anytime you try something that's outside of your comfort zone as a writer, you're going to get better, right? It's really, really important to put in the work, put in the time to becoming a great writer. Speaking of which, subscribe to my channel. You can go to the Hire a Writer blog and subscribe there. I have a whole team of copywriters who write on our blog, so you can get features. If you like this style of writing, go to Mark. So Mark on my blog has a lot of great like short form. He's more real pop culture, like quips and metaphors, and he's really good at this kind of writing. So just like reading his work would probably be helpful for you. And then just try. Just keep trying, and do terrible work and do good work and do mediocre work and do the work all the time, and you will get better and you will be awesome at what you do.